21 Black R&B legends who left their careers due to incurable diseases. What if some of the greatest voices in Black R&B didn't stop singing because they wanted to, but because their bodies simply couldn't survive the industry anymore? Behind the applause, platinum records, and standing ovations were untold battles with incurable diseases, collapsing health, and silent suffering. Tonight, we're uncovering the legends who didn't fade away. They were forced out. Their stories will challenge how we define success, sacrifice, and survival in music. Watch closely, because by the end, you may never hear their songs the same way again. Subscribe to Black Excellence Legends and join the conversation. Ernie Isley. Ernie Isley was never the loudest voice in the room, yet his presence shaped the sound of modern funk, soul, and R&B in ways few guitarists ever achieved. As the youngest member of the Isley Brothers, Ernie brought a sharp, experimental edge that transformed the group from a classic vocal act into a genre-defining powerhouse. His guitar work wasn't flashy for attention. It was emotional, precise, and deeply intentional, blending rock distortion with soulful restraint. Unlike many legends, Ernie didn't disappear because of scandal or loss of relevance. His exit came quietly, triggered by a neurological condition known as peripheral neuropathy. The illness attacked what defined him most: sensation and control in his hands. Numbness, sudden spasms, and weakening reflexes made it increasingly difficult to perform with accuracy. For a guitarist whose identity depended on touch and timing, the struggle was devastating. Those close to him recalled moments when Ernie would sit with his instrument for long periods, unable to trust his fingers. He refused to fake performances or rely on shortcuts. Instead, he chose withdrawal over compromise. There was no dramatic farewell tour, no public announcement, just silence, chosen with dignity. Ernie Isley's story is not about death, but about loss of ability, a quieter tragedy that many artists fear more than mortality. His decision to step away reflects integrity, not defeat. Though his hands no longer answer the way they once did, his influence remains embedded in countless recordings, inspiring generations of musicians who still chase the sound he helped create. Sharon Jones. Sharon Jones was never supposed to be a star, at least not by the industry's rules. She found recognition not in her youth, but in her 40s, proving that soul does not obey timelines. With a voice rooted in gospel grit and raw funk energy, Sharon resurrected a classic sound in a modern world that had nearly forgotten it. On stage, she was unstoppable, sweating, shouting, dancing like every performance might be her last. Then illness entered without warning. Sharon was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive diseases known in modern medicine. The diagnosis forced her to step away from touring, but not from identity. After surgery and treatment, she returned to the spotlight visibly changed, thinner, bald, physically weakened, yet emotionally fearless. Audiences didn't see a victim. They saw defiance. Behind the scenes, however, the battle was brutal. Pain followed her constantly. Energy came in short bursts. After performances, she often collapsed backstage, conserving strength she no longer had. Still, Sharon refused to let sickness dictate how she would be remembered. She rejected sympathy-driven appearances and chose honesty over spectacle. Eventually, her body demanded what her spirit would not grant: rest. Sharon quietly ended live performances, spending her remaining time with loved ones and recording whenever possible. She passed away in 2016, leaving behind more than albums. She left proof that passion does not fade with age or circumstance. Sharon Jones didn't retreat because she lost her voice. She stepped back because survival required it. Her legacy stands as a reminder that courage can be loud, exhausted, joyful, and unbreakable all at once. Some flames burn briefly, others burn late, but when they do, they light everything. Betty Wright. Betty Wright was never created for silence. From the moment her voice entered the soul scene, it carried truth without apology. She wasn't just a singer, she was a storyteller, a mentor, and a quiet architect of modern R&B. With songs that spoke openly about love, independence, and desire, Betty redefined what honesty in music could sound like, especially for Black women. As years passed, Betty slowly stepped away from the spotlight, not because her relevance faded, but because her strength was being tested. She was battling a long-term illness, later confirmed as cancer, a fight she kept mostly private. Unlike dramatic exits often expected from legends, Betty chose restraint. She stopped touring, limited public appearances, and focused on studio work whenever her health allowed. Even as her body weakened, her purpose remained sharp. Betty continued guiding younger artists, shaping voices behind the scenes rather than standing at center stage. Those close to her described recording sessions where she would pause frequently to rest, yet insist on completing each track. "This message matters," she reportedly said, treating every lyric as something worth preserving. Betty Wright passed away in 2020, but her departure from performing had already happened years earlier, quietly, deliberately, and on her own terms. She did not surrender to illness. She adapted. Her retreat wasn't about defeat, but about choosing how to give what remained of herself without being consumed by expectation. Her legacy is not measured only in hits, but in influence. Betty proved that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it teaches, protects, and endures in silence. She left the stage so others could stand taller, carrying forward the lessons she lived by. Speak honestly, love boldly, and never let hardship erase your voice. Linda Jones. Linda Jones possessed a voice that felt almost unreal. Soft yet piercing, delicate yet commanding, her soprano carried a vulnerability that could stop listeners mid-breath. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Linda stood out in the soul landscape not because she tried to dominate it, but because her emotion felt painfully genuine. Songs like Hypnotized revealed a young woman who sang as if every note came directly from her heart. What few people knew was that Linda had lived with diabetes from a very young age. She rarely spoke about it, choosing instead to protect her image as a rising star. Touring schedules were demanding, rest was limited, and the pressure to perform often outweighed concern for her own health. Linda pushed forward, believing discipline and passion could overcome physical limits. In 1972, during a small performance in Harlem, something went terribly wrong. After finishing a song, Linda quietly stepped backstage and told her manager she felt cold, dizzy, and unable to see clearly. There was no dramatic collapse on stage, no farewell moment for the audience. Hours later, she fell into a coma caused by severe diabetic complications. She never woke up. Linda Jones passed away at just 27 years old, an age forever associated with unfinished potential. Her career didn't slowly fade, it stopped instantly. No final album, no comeback, only silence where a future should have been. Linda's story is not about fame taken away by time, but by fragility. It reminds us that talent alone cannot shield the body from illness. Some voices leave not because they are forgotten, but because life itself is unforgiving. Linda Jones didn't live long enough to see how deeply her music would echo, but even decades later, her voice still sounds like a promise left unanswered. Isaac Hayes. Isaac Hayes didn't enter music, he commanded it. With a deep, resonant baritone and a presence that felt almost mythic, Hayes reshaped soul music into something cinematic and fearless. He wasn't only a performer, he was a composer, producer, and cultural force. From groundbreaking film scores to politically charged albums, his work carried authority, confidence, and weight. Yet the same intensity that fueled his artistry also placed immense strain on his body. Years of relentless work, demanding schedules, and health challenges gradually took their toll. In the mid-2000s, Isaac suffered a severe stroke, a life-altering event that immediately stripped away the physical control required to perform and compose at his usual level. Speech became difficult. Coordination weakened. The commanding figure audiences once knew was suddenly vulnerable. Unlike many artists who attempt a public return, Hayes chose privacy. He canceled appearances, withdrew from recording, and relocated away from industry pressure. There were no explanations offered to the media, no dramatic statements. His silence wasn't avoidance, it was self-preservation. Those close to him shared that Isaac struggled deeply with the reality of losing independence, especially after a lifetime defined by mastery and control. In 2008, Isaac Hayes passed away unexpectedly at home. By then, he had already stepped away from music, long before death made it final. His departure from the stage wasn't about fading relevance or creative exhaustion, it was about dignity. He understood that his legacy didn't need prolonging through visible decline. Isaac Hayes remains a symbol of strength, but also of restraint. He showed that knowing when to stop can be as powerful as knowing how to lead. His voice may have fallen silent, but the influence of his sound continues to move through generations, steady, commanding, and unmistakably his. Luther Ingram. Luther Ingram's voice didn't shout for attention, it pulled listeners in. Warm, pleading, and deeply human, his delivery felt like a conversation rather than a performance. When "If Loving You Is Wrong, I Don't Want to Be Right" exploded onto the charts in the early 1970s, Luther became the sound of emotional honesty. The song wasn't flashy, but it was unforgettable, turning him into a household name almost overnight. Behind the success, however, Luther's health was far more fragile than his public image suggested. He suffered from chronic heart disease, a condition that worsened under the stress of touring, late nights, and constant travel. Doctors warned him that continuing at the same pace could be dangerous, but slowing down meant risking the momentum he had worked his entire life to achieve. As the years passed, Luther made a difficult choice. Rather than performing while visibly struggling, he gradually stepped away from the spotlight. Shows were canceled. Recording sessions became rare. Unlike artists whose careers end in scandal or public collapse, Luther simply faded from view. There was no controversy, only absence. In 2007, Luther Ingram passed away from complications related to heart failure. By that time, he had already been gone from the stage for years. His departure wasn't driven by loss of talent or relevance, it was guided by survival. He chose health over applause, even though it meant surrendering the career moment most artists spend a lifetime chasing. Luther Ingram's legacy lives in restraint. He proved that stepping back can be an act of strength, not defeat. His music remains a reminder that sometimes the most powerful decisions happen off-stage, made quietly, without an audience. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton possessed a voice that seemed to defy biology. Effortless, airy, and astonishingly high, her whistle register felt less like technique and more like instinct. In the 1970s, Minnie didn't just sing love songs. She elevated them, turning emotion into something almost celestial. Lovin' You wasn't built for charts or radio formulas. It was a personal expression that somehow reached the entire world. At the height of her success, Minnie received devastating news. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, an illness that arrived quietly but progressed aggressively. Doctors advised immediate treatment, yet Minnie faced an impossible decision. Surgery could extend her life, but it would also end any chance of having children. She chose motherhood, fully aware of the consequences. As her condition worsened, Minnie didn't retreat into silence. Instead, she transformed her platform into a message. She continued recording selectively, appeared in public with honesty, and spoke openly about her diagnosis at a time when illness was rarely discussed by celebrities. There was no denial, no illusion of invincibility, only courage. Eventually, the physical demands of performing became too heavy. Touring stopped. Studio work slowed. Minnie's body no longer allowed her voice to soar the way it once had. In 1979, She passed away at just 31 years old, leaving behind unfinished plans and a career that still felt as though it was only beginning. Minnie Riperton's legacy isn't defined by how long she lived, but by how fully she lived while she could. Her voice remains unmatched, not because of range alone, but because it carried truth. She didn't leave music because she was forgotten. She left because her body could no longer hold what her spirit wanted to give. Billy Preston. Billy Preston brought joy wherever his fingers touched the keyboard. His sound was bright, playful, and filled with spiritual energy, earning him the rare title of the Fifth Beatle. Unlike many artists who chased the spotlight, Billy let the music speak first. Whether working alongside legends or standing on his own, his presence lifted every room he entered. Behind that infectious positivity, however, Billy's health quietly deteriorated. Years of intense touring and personal struggles weakened his body, and by the early 2000s, he was battling chronic kidney disease. Dialysis became part of his routine, draining his strength and limiting his ability to travel or perform. The man once known for boundless energy now had to measure every movement. Billy attempted brief returns, but the physical toll was undeniable. Long studio sessions became exhausting. Live appearances were shortened or canceled altogether. Rather than risk being remembered for diminished performances, Billy gradually stepped away. There were no farewell tours, no official retirement announcement, just absence. In 2006, Billy Preston fell into a coma caused by complications from kidney failure. He passed away shortly after, having already been separated from music for years. His exit wasn't marked by scandal or controversy, but by quiet endurance. Those close to him described a man who remained gentle and humorous even as his body failed him. Billy Preston's legacy isn't defined by illness, but by resilience. He proved that joy can exist alongside suffering, and that brilliance doesn't always need constant visibility. His music continues to radiate warmth, reminding listeners that even when an artist is forced to leave the stage, the spirit they put into sound never disappears. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway was a musician who felt everything too deeply. His voice carried warmth, sorrow, and intelligence all at once, while his piano work reflected discipline shaped by classical training and gospel roots. Donny didn't just perform songs, he inhabited them. Every lyric sounded lived in, every melody emotionally precise. Yet beneath the brilliance, Donny was fighting an invisible enemy. He struggled with severe mental illness, later diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenia. At a time when mental health was poorly understood and heavily stigmatized, Donny received limited support. The pressure of touring, recording deadlines, and public expectations intensified his condition, slowly disrupting his ability to function consistently. As his illness progressed, Donny's career became unstable. Studio sessions were interrupted by paranoia, trust eroded. Performances were canceled unexpectedly. Producers and collaborators often didn't know how to help, mistaking symptoms for unprofessional behavior. Rather than growing creatively stagnant, Donny was mentally overwhelmed. Despite these struggles, his artistry never faded. Songs like "Someday We'll All Be Free" sounded less like hope and more like a quiet plea, a reflection of a man searching for peace within himself. Gradually, Donny withdrew from the public eye, unable to sustain the demands of a career that required emotional exposure he could no longer control. In 1979, Donny Hathaway's life ended tragically. By then, his relationship with music had already been fractured by illness. His departure from the industry was not a choice, but a consequence of a mind under siege. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack sang as if confession were his natural language. His voice carried grit, tenderness, and lived experience, shaped by gospel beginnings and sharpened by a turbulent life. Bobby didn't aim for perfection. He aimed for truth. Every performance sounded like a man telling his story in real time, flaws and all. Late in his career, Just as renewed appreciation brought him back into the spotlight, Bobby faced a devastating challenge. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a condition that slowly unraveled his connection to the very songs that defined him. Lyrics once etched into muscle memory began to slip away. Familiar melodies felt distant. For an artist whose power came from emotional recall, the loss was especially cruel. Bobby tried to continue. He appeared on stage, sometimes relying on cues or support from bandmates, determined not to surrender without a fight. But the disease progressed unpredictably. Confusion replaced confidence. Performance became stressful rather than liberating, and moments of clarity grew shorter. Eventually, Bobby stepped back. Not because the audience stopped loving him, but because he could no longer trust his own mind. Recording sessions were halted. Touring plans were abandoned. His departure wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, marked by concern from those who cared about him more than his legacy. In 2014, Bobby Womack passed away after complications related to his health struggles. By then, the separation from music was already complete. His career didn't end due to irrelevance or lack of inspiration, but because memory itself had turned against him. Bobby Womack leaves behind more than hits. He leaves an example of raw humanity in music. His story reminds us that even the strongest voices depend on fragile minds, and that sometimes the bravest act is knowing when to let go. Jean Knight. Jean Knight's voice arrived without warning and left an unforgettable mark. When Mr. Big Stuff exploded in the early 1970s, it wasn't just a hit, it was an attitude. Confident, playful, and unapologetically bold, Jean sounded like a woman fully aware of her power. The song crossed generations, cultures, and charts, making her a defining voice of an era almost overnight. But unlike many stars who ride success into long visibility, Jean's journey took a different turn. After the spotlight faded, she returned to a quieter life, continuing to sing occasionally but never chasing the industry's constant demands. Decades later, her health began to decline in ways that music could no longer mask. Jean suffered a stroke, an event that dramatically altered her physical strength and mobility. Recovery was slow and incomplete. Speaking required effort. Singing, once instinctive, became exhausting. As time passed, she also showed signs of cognitive decline, making it increasingly difficult to remember lyrics, arrangements, and performance routines. Rather than forcing herself back onto the stage, Jean chose dignity. She stopped performing publicly, allowing her legacy to stand untouched. There were no comeback announcements, no attempts to recreate past glory. Friends described her as peaceful, aware that her most important contribution had already been given. In 2023, Jean Knight passed away at the age of 80. Long before her death, her career had already come to rest. Not because audiences forgot her, but because her body and mind no longer allowed her to continue. Jean Knight's story is a reminder that impact is not measured by longevity. Sometimes one song is enough to define a lifetime. Her voice didn't disappear, it settled into history, confident, proud, and complete. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin didn't earn the title Queen of Soul through volume or spectacle. Her authority came from conviction. Every note carried certainty, faith, and emotional command. Whether singing about love, heartbreak, or spiritual strength, Aretha sounded immovable, as if her voice itself could not be challenged. But even legends have limits. In the final decade of her life, Aretha's health began to decline quietly. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a disease known for its severity and discretion. True to her nature, Aretha kept details private. There were no public updates, no dramatic announcements. She chose control over curiosity. As the illness progressed, performing became increasingly difficult. Energy faded. Travel took a toll. Appearances grew rare, carefully selected, and deeply meaningful. When Aretha did step on stage, the performances felt less like concerts and more like moments of reverence. Audiences weren't watching a comeback. They were witnessing resilience. Eventually, Aretha made the decision to withdraw completely. Not because her voice had lost power, but because her body demanded rest. She spent her remaining time surrounded by family, faith, and dignity. The stage, which had given her everything, was released without regret. In 2018, Aretha Franklin passed away, leaving behind a catalog that shaped modern music itself. Her departure from public life wasn't a defeat. It was a final act of self-respect, a reminder that even queens are allowed to rest. Curtis Mayfield. Curtis Mayfield was never just a musician. He was a moral compass. While others sang about personal desire, Curtis sang about responsibility, justice, and hope. His music didn't merely entertain, it instructed, uplifted, and awakened generations. Songs like People Get Ready and Move On Up became soundtracks for dignity and perseverance. Then fate intervened without warning. In 1990, during an outdoor performance in Brooklyn, a lighting rig collapsed and crushed Curtis on stage. The impact shattered his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. In a single moment, the man who had carried movements with his voice lost control of his own body. For many, that would have been the end. For Curtis Mayfield, it was a transformation. Unable to stand, unable to hold a guitar, and barely able to breathe without assistance, Curtis refused silence. He continued composing by dictating melodies line by line, shaping arrangements through memory and imagination. Recording became a physical trial. He had to lie flat, singing in short bursts between breaths. Yet the emotion never weakened. His final album, New World Order, stands as proof that creativity does not depend on mobility. It depends on will. Curtis officially withdrew from live performance, not out of surrender, but necessity. His health deteriorated slowly, complicated by respiratory issues and long-term strain. In 1999, he passed away, but his message did not. Curtis Mayfield showed the world that progress isn't measured by speed or strength. Sometimes, moving forward means refusing to let tragedy define the destination. Even when the body stops, purpose can still walk ahead. Melvin Franklin. Melvin Franklin was never the loudest voice in the room, yet without him, the harmony would collapse. As the base foundation of the Temptations, Melvin didn't chase attention. He anchored it. His voice was the gravity that kept the group balanced, steady, and unmistakably whole. Behind that calm presence was a body fighting a long, invisible war. For decades, Melvin suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, a chronic autoimmune condition that caused relentless pain, swelling, and gradual physical deterioration. While audiences saw elegance and stability on stage, Melvin often performed through agony, relying on medication just to stand upright under the lights. As the disease progressed, it began affecting his nervous system. Mobility weakened, muscle control faltered. In the early 1990s, Melvin experienced episodes where his legs failed him completely. Doctors warned him that continuing to perform could result in permanent paralysis. For a man who had defined reliability, stepping back was devastating. Yet Melvin chose preservation over pride. He quietly withdrew from touring, focusing on health rather than headlines. There were no dramatic farewells, no public confessions, just absence, and those who knew understood why. In his final years, Melvin lived privately, surrounded by family and memories of music that had shaped generations. He passed away in 1995, following complications related to seizures and long-term illness. Melvin Franklin's legacy isn't measured by spotlight moments. It's measured by endurance. He proved that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums steadily beneath the melody, holding everything together until the very end. David Ruffin. David Ruffin didn't just sing for the Temptations, he bled through every lyric. His voice carried urgency, raw emotion, and desperation that couldn't be rehearsed. When Ruffin sang about longing, it felt lived in, not imagined. That intensity made him unforgettable, but it also exposed a fragile inner world. Behind the tailored suits and flawless choreography, David was unraveling. Years of substance abuse damaged his lungs and heart, but the deeper wound was psychological. He struggled with paranoia, depression, and emotional instability that gradually separated him from reality. Music, once his refuge, began to feel overwhelming. As his mental health deteriorated, David became unpredictable. Studio sessions were abandoned. Performances were canceled without explanation. There were moments when he stood frozen, unable to continue, staring into space as if the music had vanished from reach. Those closest to him noticed something heartbreaking. He no longer trusted his own voice. Doctors urged rest and treatment. Friends pleaded. But David resisted, trapped between fear and pride. Eventually, the industry moved on while he quietly faded from the stage. There was no official farewell, only distance and confusion. In his final years, Ruffin lived in isolation, struggling to balance brief moments of clarity with long stretches of chaos. In 1991, he died from a drug overdose, the result of a body and mind pushed beyond repair. David Ruffin's story is not one of wasted talent, but of unhealed pain. His voice didn't disappear because it failed, it disappeared because it carried too much. Ray Charles. Ray Charles lived in darkness long before the world ever saw his light. Blind from childhood, he transformed limitation into innovation, fusing gospel, blues, jazz, country, and R&B into a language that changed American music forever. His sound didn't follow rules, it rewrote them. But brilliance came at a cost. Years of relentless touring and past substance abuse left Ray's body quietly failing. By the late 1990s, he was battling serious liver and kidney disease, conditions that drained his strength and required constant medical care. Though he had overcome addiction decades earlier, the damage lingered. Ray never wanted sympathy. As his health declined, he canceled performances without explanation, choosing privacy over spectacle. Those close to him noticed changes: trembling hands, shortened rehearsals, moments of exhaustion that no audience ever saw. The piano remained his sanctuary, but even that demanded more energy than his body could give. Eventually, Ray made the decision to retreat from the road. Not because his mind had dulled or his spirit weakened, but because continuing would mean surrendering dignity. He refused to let illness define his final image. In his last years, Ray focused on recording and mentorship, shaping music from behind the scenes while undergoing intensive treatment. He passed away in 2004, leaving behind a legacy that continues to influence every genre it touched. Ray Charles didn't vanish, he withdrew. There's a difference. His departure was an act of self-awareness, proving that true strength sometimes lies in knowing when to step back. Even without sight, Ray showed the world how to see deeper. Major Lance. Major Lance represented joy at a time when joy was rare. In the 1960s, his upbeat Chicago soul sound and magnetic smile brought warmth to audiences living through social unrest. Songs like "The Monkey Time" and weren't just hits, they were escapes, moments of lightness in heavy times. Yet behind the energy was a body quietly breaking down. By the late 1980s, Major Lance was suffering from multiple chronic illnesses, including heart disease, diabetes, liver complications, and dangerously high blood pressure. The symptoms crept in slowly: headaches, exhaustion, shortness of breath. At first, he dismissed them as age catching up. Then the collapse came. During a performance at the Apollo Theater in 1988, Major suddenly stopped mid-song and fell backstage. His blood pressure had spiked to life-threatening levels. It was the first show he ever canceled, and the last. From that moment on, the stage became a risk rather than a home. Tours were quietly abandoned. Recording plans dissolved. Major never announced retirement, but his absence said everything. Those close to him recall long periods of silence, days spent staring at old stage shoes he knew he would never wear again. Major Lance spent his final years living modestly, far from the spotlight that once defined him. When he passed away in 1994 from heart failure, the news barely made headlines. But for those who remembered his music, an entire chapter of soul closed quietly. Major Lance reminds us that happiness on stage doesn't guarantee health behind the curtain. Sometimes, the brightest smiles are worn by those carrying the heaviest weight.
Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye didn't just sing songs, he asked questions society wasn't ready to answer. His voice carried intimacy, protest, sensuality, and spiritual conflict all at once. From "What's Going On" to "Let's Get It On," Marvin became the emotional mirror of a changing America. But as his influence grew, his inner world unraveled. Long before his life ended violently, Marvin had already stepped away from music. The reasons weren't visible on album covers. He suffered from severe depression, paranoia, and substance dependency, conditions that gradually dismantled his ability to function creatively. Mental illness, not lack of talent, became the true barrier. By the late 1970s, Marvin was canceling shows, missing rehearsals, and isolating himself for months at a time. His confidence collapsed. He became convinced that people were watching him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. Recording sessions stretched endlessly, then stopped altogether. Silence replaced sound. Unlike others, Marvin didn't formally retire. He drifted away. Music, once his refuge, became a source of pressure and fear. Financial problems worsened his condition, forcing him into exile overseas. Even there, peace never lasted. When Marvin returned briefly in the early 1980s, it was clear the spark was fragile. The voice remained stunning, but the man behind it was exhausted. He spoke openly about feeling broken, about not trusting himself anymore. Marvin Gaye's career didn't end with an announcement or illness diagnosis. It ended quietly, eroded by a mind that could no longer protect itself. His death in 1984 shocked the world, but his withdrawal had already been underway for years. O.V. Wright. O.V. Wright sang with urgency, as if every note carried a warning. Raised in gospel and hardened by Southern soul, his voice sounded wounded, pleading, and unfiltered. Songs like 8 Men, 4 Women, and Into Something Can't Shake Loose didn't ask for attention. They demanded it. By the early 1980s, that voice began to betray him. O.V. was diagnosed with lung cancer, a disease that tightened his chest and stole his breath piece by piece. Singing, once instinctive, became a physical battle. Long phrases collapsed, notes burned, silence crept in where power once lived. Unlike artists who retreat quietly, O.V. Wright resisted. He continued performing long after doctors warned him to stop. Audiences noticed the difference. Shorter sets, pauses between verses, moments where he turned away from the microphone to recover air. What they didn't see was the pain backstage, coughing fits, weakness, exhaustion that lingered for days. Recording sessions became rare and brief. His body could no longer handle repeated takes. Yet when he did sing, the emotion deepened. The struggle etched itself into his sound, giving his later performances a rawness that felt almost unbearable. Eventually, the disease made the decision for him. O.V. stepped away not because his spirit faded, but because survival required surrender. He passed away in 1980, before receiving the wider recognition his talent deserved. O.V. Wright's career didn't end with decline, it ended with defiance. He sang until breath itself became scarce. And in doing so, he left behind a lesson soul music understands well. Sometimes the most powerful performances are the ones given at the very edge of endurance. Don Covey. Don Covey was a builder of rhythm, not just a performer. As a singer, songwriter, and creative force, he shaped soul music from behind the curtain as much as he did on stage. His compositions fueled the careers of others, while his own voice carried grit, humor, and emotional truth. Covey didn't chase the spotlight followed his work. That momentum changed suddenly in the early 2000s. Don Covey suffered a major stroke, an event that altered everything at once. Speech became difficult. Movement slowed. The precise control required for singing and songwriting disappeared almost overnight. For a man whose life revolved around sound, silence arrived without warning. Recovery was long and incomplete. Covey struggled to communicate, often needing assistance to express thoughts that once flowed effortlessly through melody and lyric. Music, which had always been instinctive, now required effort his body could no longer provide. Public appearances stopped. Studio work became impossible. Unlike artists who fade gradually, Don Covey's exit was abrupt. There was no farewell tour, no final album meant to close a chapter. One day he was active, the next he was gone from the public eye. Friends described his frustration, fully aware of what he had lost, yet unable to reclaim it. Covey spent his final years away from the industry he helped shape, living quietly while the world continued to sing songs born from his mind. When he passed away in 2015, many listeners didn't realize how deeply his fingerprints were embedded in soul history. Don Covey's story reminds us that influence doesn't always come with visibility. Some legends leave not because inspiration ends, but because the body interrupts the conversation. His silence wasn't absence. It was the echo of a lifetime already given. Johnny Adams. Johnny Adams possessed one of the most emotionally controlled voices in soul music. Known as the Tan Canary, he sang with elegance rather than force, stretching phrases gently while holding listeners in quiet tension. His approach was refined, intimate, and deeply human. As the years passed, that control began to slip for reasons no amount of practice could fix. Johnny Adams suffered from severe asthma, a lifelong condition that worsened with age. What had once been manageable became dangerous. Singing demanded oxygen his lungs could no longer reliably supply. By the late 1990s, Adams found himself shortening performances, avoiding demanding arrangements, and resting between songs. Fans noticed his softer presence, but few understood the physical cost behind each note. A single attack could leave him hospitalized, gasping and exhausted for days. Eventually, touring became impossible. Johnny didn't announce retirement. He simply stopped accepting bookings that placed his life at risk. The stage, once a place of control, had become unpredictable. Breathing, not talent, dictated the limits. Despite his condition, Adams continued recording when health allowed, preserving his artistry without compromising safety. His later recordings carried a fragile beauty, shaped by restraint rather than power. Every lyric felt measured, intentional, and earned. Johnny Adams passed away in 1998, but his departure from active performance had already occurred quietly, guided by necessity rather than choice. His career didn't end with scandal, decline, or irrelevance. It ended because the body demanded mercy. They gave the world timeless music, yet many of these Black R&B legends were forced to walk away not because of fading talent, but because their bodies betrayed them. Incurable diseases, mental battles, and physical breakdowns silenced voices that still had more to say. Their exits raise an uncomfortable truth. The industry celebrates brilliance, but often ignores human limits. Were these artists truly supported when they needed rest, care, and protection? Or were they pushed until silence became inevitable? If greatness demands sacrifice, how much suffering is too much? Let us know what you think.